What's up, everyone? Kriddle here, and we have had a lot of news about Monsters and Memories over the past 36 or so hours, and I wanted to try to get as much of that information to you all as I can in a concise way, as some of this comes from up to 10-hour-long streams. I haven't even had a chance to go through all of that content yet, but I will give you all the information I do have so far, and then as I get through the rest of it, I will bring that to you. I do have some notes over here, so I'll be constantly looking over here to the side, hopefully referencing things so I don't miss anything, but I still may miss a few things. So if you know of something that I missed that's pretty important, please let us know down in the comments. I will also have links in the description for as many of these things as possible. So I'll try to let you know where I get some of this information from if I can. Anyway, these all came from 3 different streams. One was from Nick's stream 2 days ago, which is about 2 hours long, and that's going over what you see right here, which is a state of balance, which is going to be the bulk of this particular video. And then he also had a 10-hour stream last night that was mostly going over some changes to the Elementalist and summon abilities is what he worked on for the most part. We'll get to that eventually, and I'll kind of explain where we're going with that. So that's going to be where we're starting, but starting from 2 days ago when he had his stream, the very beginning of that stream, there was just basically a question and answer between Nick and a lot of us in the community in his chat. And some of the things that stand out that you all may want to know is the question about epic weapons or possibly even epic armor or epic equipable items. And Nick said, yes, most definitely that is what they plan to do at some point in the future. Obviously, those things are not currently in the game, but that is an absolute plan. He went a little bit more into detail, and this is about 8 minutes into his stream, talking about armor and equipable things, maybe full sets of armor, maybe individual pieces. They're not 100% sure on that. And then obviously epic weapons are also highly considered for that. In addition to that, fighters are getting some nifty changes coming in soon. He didn't go into a lot of detail there, except for one thing, which I'll talk about here in a second, that kind of goes along with the wizards. And then clerics are also getting some changes to their supplication skill, which is their skill basically that increases their strength and allowing them to do a little bit more damage in melee combat. But as a lot of you know, clerics need to be sitting down to generate mana. So what they're going to be changing some of that to is a way to generate mana, maybe through melee combat or maybe through casting. One of the ideas is possibly a mechanic where you get the last hit on a mob, very similar to that of a wizard, but he is hesitant about doing that too much because he doesn't want people competing for last hit on mob too often. So they might be doing a dot of some sort. Didn't go into a lot of detail there, but that's the idea with supplication on the cleric, to try to get them a little bit more mana so they're not always having to sit down. So we'll just have to see where that ends up. The next thing is research is a skill that they're going to be adding in. So it's going to be a trade skill, and it's going to allow classes to research abilities. This is something that was similar to EverQuest 1, where you had a research like book or whatever, and you put in a couple pages that you would get from dropped enemies, and then you could research a spell, and then boom, you could put that spell into your spell book. Something similar to that, but this is going to be for abilities for all of the melee classes. They're also going to be adding in another skill for researching spells, and with that, the idea of cantrips kind of came up. So spells where you can get maybe one-time uses of a cantrip, a spell you could cast right out of your inventory, kind of D&D style. So these were ideas that were just bounced around between Nick and some members of the community, and Nick really liked that idea. So we might see something like that in the future, but right now it's just kind of in the discussion phases. So going back to the fighter and the things that the fighter are going to be getting along with wizards is they're going to be adding in critical hits with both of those classes. So wizards are going to be able to critically strike with their spells, and fighters are going to be able to critically strike with their attacks. Some things that Nick was talking about with this is why not other classes? And he was just trying to say, we're trying to do different things to differentiate different classes in the way that they do damage. So fighters are going to be getting that. Not necessarily the other melee classes. Things like rogues might be getting other abilities to increase their damage in the future. But that's kind of where we're at with that right now. There was also a lot of Inquisitor chat throughout the entire stream, so I'm not going to be able to go over all of that, but there are a lot of changes coming soon. Some of those are referencing this right here. So Nick wanted to give a big shout out to, I think it's Magicot, I believe. So Magicot, thank you for posting this. I believe this is who Nick was referencing. He didn't say specifically, but this is the big Inquisitor post that was there. So I'll put this also down in the description if you are interested in that. But he made some very good, valid points about the Inquisitor, and Nick is in the process of updating and changing some things, a lot of which is going to be based on that input. Not necessarily going in the direction of that, but taking that input and saying, hey, how can we make the Inquisitor a better class? That was also a big discussion during the last playtest, so it's going to be nice to see those things happen. Starting around 22 minutes into that stream from 2 days ago, that's where he started talking about the state of balance, and we're going to go over that here in a second. And then the second stream that he had, which was last night, was the 10-hour-long marathon stream, and this was mostly Nick going into a lot of coding and a lot of creating of abilities. So the gist of that stream, just to sum it up, like I said, it's very long. He went into crafting of arrows. So that's one of the first things that he changed, is the ability to craft now 100 or even 1,000 arrows at a time. So that's going to help out the archers who are constantly having to craft, and it's just very time consuming. And then also adding in an ability for archers called Salvage Arrow that they can cast, and then they can loot off of corpses around them. They'll be able to loot arrows off of those. That's the idea. I'm not sure when that will be implemented. It may be in as of the end of that stream. I'm not 100% sure, but that is the idea of where they're trying to go with that for now. They may do some other adjustments in the future, so kind of keep an eye on that. For the remainder of that stream, Nick mostly worked on the Elementalist class. He was taking thoughts and ideas from the chat. So a lot of the summoned abilities for the Elementalists, summon bandages, summon food came up at one point, and then the summon weapons and armor and things. For the most of the stream, Nick was working on summon weapons, where he created a variety of summon weapons for different tiers, where you could give those weapons to other players and they could use those in battle. And most of these, what I wanted to say specifically about these is that they are not going to be super strong weapons, but they're going to be better than your rusty weapons that you're going to be picking up at that level. So if you're around level 20 and you're picking up, some rusty, iron around that level, these will be better than those weapons. And they do have procs on them. He actually showed that off in the video where he was using the weapon after he created the spells, and they were doing about a 20 damage proc or so on the ones that he was using. This was on a level, I believe, 60 shaman that he was using them for, with around 40 dexterity, and they were proccing fairly quickly. We'll go over the dexterity and the reason I mentioned that here in just a second. The last thing I want to mention before we get into the state of balance changes is Sean also had a stream. It was about 3 or 4 hours long yesterday. I caught the second half of that stream, so I need to go back and watch the first half of it before I talk about it, but we'll probably do another video if there's a lot of big points from that. There was nothing really major to talk about from there, but Sean always has his insight, which I like to hear as well. So I'll probably do another video on that later. So now let's jump into the state of balance. This was the majority of Nick's stream from 2 days ago, where he went over the state of balance, and over a 2-hour stream, I'm going to try to bring it a little bit more concise and answer some of the questions and kind of go over the ideas. So basically, you guys can read this, or you can go to his stream and read it if you want to. We're going to start here where it says, this led to, so a focus on killing blues and light blues. So rather than most of us right now, we're killing even con mobs or yellow mobs, that's the best experience. They're trying to focus on killing blues and light blues, which will slow down experience a little bit because you get less experience from those enemies. Trios being the ideal group size for leveling at high levels. This has been a big discussion, and we're going to talk about that more down here under the experience. This has been a big discussion lately as duos and trios and even solos are able to level much faster than a group of 4, 5, and 6. And a lot of that has to do with the time to kill. So right now we have very fast time to kill in the game, and they're trying to slow that down a little bit. For solo players, they're looking at about 1 minute per mob, and for groups of 6, you're looking at 10 to 15 seconds per enemy, which is a little bit too fast. In addition to that, very little incoming damage, which kind of coincides with this low mana usage or in general for healers. So those two things, they're trying to increase the amount of damage and kind of increase the use of healers. This is especially at the higher levels, but I think it kind of goes for all of the levels. Here they say across all levels, we had two major bugs in the combat code. So melee damage was twice as accurate as on the attack side than designed due to a bug. And then in addition to that, NPC avoidance was almost 50% below target. These two things combined wasn't a massive thing because players were just basically hitting that, maxing out on that hit chance. So right now they're basically saying that players are hitting too often, which is increasing the amount of damage that melee classes are doing. So they're kind of looking at that and fixing those bugs, which will also adjust the time to kill, slowing it down because we won't be able to kill enemies as quickly. So that's kind of the idea there. Some changes to address those things down here. We will have more avoidance. So enemies will have more avoidance. In the higher levels, they will also attack faster, which will make the amount of damage that we are taking increase, obviously. So healers are going to be more necessary. NPC offense and defense value now mirrors players. Nick did not go into any detail here that I heard, but I guess it didn't mirror players previously, and now it will. And then NPCs should be more accurate when attacking higher level players, and players should not be dealing as much damage to low level NPCs. This is something that the chat was kind of like, well, shouldn't high-level players be able to absolutely demolish low-level NPCs? And while that is true, if they're what they're trying to do here is kill blues and light blues, this is only going to make it to where it's easier to kill blues and light blues. So they're kind of just adjusting that to make it feel a little bit better. Now that we're getting into experience has been a rebalance in the late game, leading to a longer late game. So right now, like I said, the duos, trios, and even solos are able to XP very, very quickly, which has been allowing them to get to high level much faster than if you go in a party of 6. So they're trying to extend that late game out a little bit more because this is not a game where you're trying to get to max level as quickly as possible and then just do in-game content. It's about the journey, as a lot of people like to say. So they're trying to kind of make that feel a little bit better. So 4, 5, and 6-man parties have larger experience bonuses than before. So they had an experience bonus before, is what this indicates. They're going to be increasing that. And then here it says, we are thinking on whether to maintain everyone's level from before the changes or to set your levels to what they would have been at current experience required values. What do you think? Should we make a poll? Nick seemed to think on his personal preference that they do not want to make a poll. He doesn't really want to do a poll. He still feels like there's plenty of people in all the different level ranges, and they also want those high level players to be out there to be able to test that high level content. So he's thinking probably not going to be doing some sort of retroactive change here, but it is a possibility in the future. So we'll have to see what happens come next playtest. We'll also be seeing this on the closed test, which is where this information comes from. But of course, that is still kind of under a semi-NDA situation. Charms is also a very big discussion here. If I look over on my notes, so basically what Nick said was a couple of times, he said charm is, quote, very strong. So they are well aware that charm is a bit strong at the moment, and they are making some adjustments to that. But one of the adjustments they are making is we're trying something new with the charm formula, and it should be easier to keep high levels charmed. So this is going to hopefully help the high level players be able to charm mobs more often. But I'm hoping at the same time they're able to kind of fix that for the low end, because right now charm kiting and charm killing, there's ways that you can do it. I'm not going to go into the details right now, but it's very fast experience-wise, which is partly why this solo, duo, trio experience groups up here are getting so much XP very quickly. So anyway, just know that charm is being looked at. As for all of this right here, all the trade skill information, I don't really want to go into a lot of detail here, as most of the trade skills are far from being finished, but they are looking at that and trying to streamline that. So the number of tiers available for crafting armor has been reduced. All recipes have been modified to be more streamlined for progression. More complex recipes in the higher tiers require specialized tooling in later tiers. And then mining nodes have been adjusted for the new recipes. And then rusty and tarnished armor has been reduced in effectiveness. So you're not going to be picking up that rusty and tarnished stuff and then just putting it on. They're going to reduce the effectiveness of that to hopefully boost the crafting of the gear or finding magical gear or named dropped items, which is another thing that we're talking about in this next section. But then also recipes redistribute to allow for smoother progression through all skill levels of enchanting. That was another big discussion because disenchanting and enchanting is very challenging right now because of that progression and some other factors. So we're going to be going into changing some of that stuff. And then other trade skills are still in progress. So like I said, this is all kind of in progress stuff. Going over this in too much detail is kind of pointless. But if you are interested in this kind of stuff, make sure you're going on the Discord and talking about that. Give your feedback on that. The devs are listening and do want to know what we prefer in the trade skill side. Going on to named mobs here. Some named NPCs drops have been rebalanced for rarity and mob availability. Some named NPCs have had respawn times and frequency adjusted. Some named NPCs have had their spawn mechanics adjusted. This one's kind of a big one. And then modifications to the guidelines dictating item strengths. Those should be retroactively implemented over time. So going back to this one right here, some named NPCs have had their spawn mechanisms adjusted. Basically what they're trying to do, and this is seen throughout the game right now in a bunch of different places, is they're trying different ways of spawning named NPCs rather than just kill placeholder and hope for a spawn. They're trying to actually have different types of ways to spawn those special mobs. If you were watching my stream during the 10-day playtest, I was actually in the process of working on one of those, and that is where you get this journal, you pick it up, and then you have to get 4 different pages, and then when you get those 4 different pages, you combine them together and you get another item. You take that item to a specific location and it spawns a named mob, which will drop some sort of rare item. So that's one way in which they're doing it. Specifically, what they're talking about here, though, is in Upper Salmon. So this is our Upper Saman. This is in the higher up area of Fallen Pass. So if you have gone into Fallen Pass around your level, high teens to low 20s, you can look up and you see these castles up in that area. That is Upper Saman, or a specific area within that is that area. The environment has been significantly reworked for added challenge. Spawns have been adjusted to provide added challenge. Different areas now have distinct feel to them. And then here's what we were just talking about. Named NPCs should be both rarer, and the ones that were supposed to be triggered or part of some other mechanism are now properly assigned. So previously, these were just multiple different NPCs that were spawning from the same location. So you could have 2 or even 3 named that spawn off of one location, plus their placeholder could potentially spawn. They are now going to be changing that and adding in specific triggers. There are other places in the game, but we're not going to go over that right now. But just know that you might want to go into zones whenever you are looking around, do that /look command and try to figure out what these mechanisms are and how to spawn some of these named, because they may not spawn without additional work on your part rather than just slaying enemies around the area. Itemization. An initial pass on item availability has been done. Gaps in items have started getting backfilled. For example, wisdom items in the mid-level ranges, wisdom and int stats. This is going to be very important because they have finally giving us some information, which we're going to go over right down here, on the different stats. And wisdom and intelligence right now are only going to be giving you more mana, and it's whichever is the higher of the two. So they're going back and they're trying to backfill different items in various areas where it was lacking. I know that they're around the level like 15 range or so, it was kind of lacking. And then again in the like 30 range, it was kind of lacking. They're starting to spread that out and add more items to the game that we can go after, which is really nice to see, because a lot of us like to see those named defeat a named and you get some powerful item, and it feels really bad when you defeat a named and it doesn't have anything on it. It just feels, like, oh, I wish something would have dropped here. So we'll see what that does. Some light scaling to damage and healing has been introduced, tied to wisdom and intelligence. So that's what this is all about, the wisdom intelligence stats here. And they're going to be adding in more damage for more damage for intelligence and more healing for wisdom. So depending on what role you are in a party, you may want to go more wisdom or more intelligence. The amount of mana you get still will be dictated on the highest of those two, but that is subject to change. They might be doing a mixture of the two in the future. We'll just have to see how that plays out. So stat utilization, we have decided to release some information or some additional information about stats. This will be on character creation screen and new player guide eventually. When that happens, I'll try to make sure that I update everyone and show this to you, as you are able to go and create characters right now, but you don't see any of this information. So going over this stuff right here, strength allows you to carry more, increase melee weapon damage, and shield block amounts. So we kind of have gone over these in the past, and we knew that it did carry more here. Pretty sure that it increased the weapon damage, but the shield block amounts is something that was debated. Nobody really knew, but now we do know this is at least the idea. This will be implemented, or it already has been, so it will be in for the next update. Stamina increases health and reduces chance to be dazed in combat. This right here, specifically dazed in combat, is stunned in combat. So if you are a tank, you know this all too well, but other classes probably know as well. When you get hit, you often get dazed when you have a little swirly thing on your head, and your character may spin side to side, depending on various factors. So if you have more stamina, it should hopefully reduce that chance of happening. This is a very good thing for tanks, so hopefully we don't get stunned and dazed and spin around as much. Agility provides damage mitigation. So previously I was saying that it's going to increase your chance to block, dodge, and parry. That may be the damage mitigation, but from my understanding, it actually increases damage mitigation. If you were to take 100 points of damage, if you have high enough agility, you may take 99, 98, etc., a lower amount of damage. So that's actually really nice to see, making it another really good tank stat for tanks, because previously most tanks would take strength, stamina, and then max out dexterity for the increased hit rate and on-hit weapon effect frequency. So we now do know that Dex does increase your chance to hit, and it increases your chance to proc, which is going to be really, really nice for the Spellblade class specifically, since most of their damage comes from their procs. Now, another question that came up right here is, does Dex increase range damage, or does maybe even agility increase range damage? Because right here we have strength increases melee weapon damage. No answer to my knowledge was given to this, so hopefully we can get an answer to that fairly soon. But as of right now, I would say continue to build strength for anyone that's doing physical damage. But Nick did say that he might want to go back and reword some of this right here, or just reword some of this post by Ollie, because he feels like it is still missing a little bit of information that he does want to get out there. Intelligence increases mana pool size. We already knew that. If it is higher than wisdom. So this confirms that intelligence or wisdom, whichever is the higher one, is going to increase your mana pool. Like I said, they might adjust that later to where you're getting a little bit from both, but as of right now, it's going to be intelligence increases your mana pool if it's higher, and it increases damage done on offensive damage spells. There was a discussion about, does this work on dots? Again, just like the ranged weapon attack, it was not directly answered. So we'll have to see and kind of test that out ourselves. But right now it's going to be offensive damage spells. Wisdom increases the mana pool if it's higher than intelligence, and increases healing done on healing spells. Another one is, will it work on HOTS? We'll have to test that out, but I would say yes, because the majority of healing spells in the game are technically HOTS, right? You have to cast them, wait 6 seconds to actually get the heal to go off, or maybe even wait 12 or 24 seconds if you're on a shaman. So they're kind of like HOTS over a period of time, and it should increase all of those. Charisma is another one that is highly talked about, highly debated. Does it actually function? Does it work? Does it, is it needed, etc.? And they have confirmed that it reduces purchase price and increases sale price, and helps with the commerce skill, which also coincidentally increases in purchase and sale prices, etc., and reduces the break rate of charm. So it doesn't say on here anything about mesmerize. So maybe it does, maybe it doesn't work with mesmerize. Maybe they want you to kind of figure that out on your own, but they do specifically state that it reduces the break rate on charm, which is going to make this good for any class that's trying to charm. I know a lot of druids that were using charm over the last playtest. Necromancers use charm quite a bit, and then enchanters and bards, obviously, which charisma is one of their main stats. So additionally, some abilities will benefit from specific stats over time, and you'll see more of those. He did give an example of this, and I can't remember what the example was off the top of my head, and I forgot to write it into my notes here. But there are some spells that do that. It was the shield spell, the rune spell, basically from the enchanter, the enchant ally. There we go. So they use stamina, for example, to increase the amount of health that give to their target. That is one of those. Additionally, some abilities will benefit from specific stats. So just an example of that. You might see more of those in the future on other classes. Traits still in progress. The only thing that he said about traits is that certain traits for classes will be just given to the classes. Things like bribe, hide for the wood elf, slam for the ogre, those kind of things will be just given to those classes. But in addition to that, we know that there are infravision, ultravision, those kinds of things. Those will still be choices. They don't want to force on anyone the different color screen. So like there's going to be a blue hue on the screen if you go with infravision. They don't want to force that on anybody because some people like that, some people don't. So you're still going to have to choose if you want those specific traits, but then the other racial traits are just going to be automatically given to you. This does not take away from your choice of trait where the other major combat traits. So things like your magic resist that you might be able to get, or brawn or dexterous, those kind of things, you're still going to be able to choose those even if you play a race that has these force traits on them. So he wanted to make sure that that was very clear. So I'm trying to emphasize that a little bit more. Buff overriding behavior in progress. So specifically to address bards and auras from players and pets overriding buffs. This isn't a huge issue, but it is kind of an issue where some buffs are overriding each other, and it does get a little bit annoying when you're trying to buff. I know that, for example, I believe the pet buff for the elementalist is overriding the enchanter haste buff, even though the enchanter haste buff is technically a faster haste, but the pet buff does add in strength. Anyway, that's what's happening with that. So there are some cases of that, and they're looking at all of that. Ability threat, working on some abilities threat values, did not go into detail here. Then ability threat, what he means here is ability resist. So resist rates are being looked at because a lot of people have complained that resist rates on their offensive spells are just being resisted too often. So they're being looked at that. This includes things like the wizard lore spells, which are still resisted quite often, even though they're supposed to not be. And then a disclaimer down here at the bottom. Remember, this is a game in development. Please be patient as we continue to balance things. So that is pretty much it for all of this. I don't think there's anything else to really go over here, but hopefully that gives you a concise bit of all the things that were talked about in the past 2 streams for Nick. I will still, like I said, try to go through the rest of the stream for Sean, and we'll take a look at that very soon. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.